Hey guys, Hypolast here with a Haven deck this time. We're going to be taking a look at the Slava deck that I managed to build. So, as a couple people requested, I did do a Haven deck for this series. We're working with Slava. If we take a quick look at Slava himself, we start at 1-1-1, so there's quite a bit of work to do with his levels. This deck is going to want to go up to 6 Might, 4 Magic, and 2 Destiny. So, it's quite a few levels we're going to need to bump over the course of the game. Not many cards that are going to be getting drawn. The nice thing about Slava is he does specialize in 3 different types of magic. We have light magic, air magic, and fire magic, which is going to give us access to a few good spells, though not as good a spell suite as I would really like. More importantly, it will give us access to a lot of really powerful, unique creatures. He doesn't have any special abilities, so his special ability is kind of just his access to the 3rd school of magic. Looking at the creatures, we're running mostly humans: Tithe Collectors, Wandering Bards, Moon Phoenix, Crusader Watchmen, Griffin Crossbowmen. These make up our low drops. Now, the Tithe Collector, I've come to the conclusion that every single Haven deck pretty much wants 4 of these. These are going to be accelerating you into turns where you can play multiple low drops, which is really important with your Griffin Crossbowmen and Griffin Legionnaires. It only requires 3 might to play each of them, and if you manage to get a whole bunch of resource in the beginning of the game, then you can play multiples of these on the same turn and get some massive guys out. Wandering Bard, just because we are playing quite a few unique creatures, which we'll get to in a second. Moon Phoenix is a one-of, I think is just really powerful in any deck that can support it, and doesn't really care about banishing cards from their graveyard, so this is almost just a give it in my eyes. And Crusader Watchman is kind of just Haven's generic 2/04, except in this case he's a 2/25 with a bit of a downside. Griffin Crossbowman and Griffin Legionnaire, let's just take a quick second to talk about these guys. So these two are fantastic. These are 2 of the cards, in addition to Barracks, that I think actually make Haven playable in the current metagame. Griffin's Bane really made that possible for Haven. So the nice thing about these is you can stack them and get some huge creatures. With just 2 stacks, these guys become 2/06 and 2/48 respectively, which are just absolutely massive. As I said, if you manage to get some early Tithe Collectors down, then getting 2 stacks on these is pretty easy. What really makes these cards great, though, is the text where when you play it, you get to search your deck for another one and put it into your hand. Now, coming from Magic, this reminds me a lot of a mechanic that was on a card called Squadron Hawk, which was a little flyer, and if you knew what flyers did in Magic, it's nothing like what they do in this game. But when you played one of them, you could search your deck for 3 other copies of it and put it into your hand, and Magic was similar to this in that you could have 4 copies of a card in your deck. And these are pretty similar, and Squadron Hawk, for a long time, was considered one of the best cards in the game, alongside a couple other cards that synergized really well with it, just because of the card advantage it got you. Now, both of these cards are actually more relevant than Squadron Hawk was in its day, and they get you the same amount of card advantage. A 1/2/4 for 3 and a 1/0/3 shooter for 2 is pretty relevant in this game, especially with the amount of flexibility that they offer you. The ability to turn a Griffin Crossbowman into a 2/06 and a Griffin Legionnaire into a 2/48 just by doubling their mana cost, but it can be spread out over multiple turns, makes these very, very real cards. Something that you should be aware of when you're playing these is that you don't have to stack them. It's pretty reasonable to play 2 2/4/8s instead of a single 4/8/16, or even 4 different 1/2/4s. The crossbowmen you probably want to stack more often, just because you need to make their attack more relevant than just the 1 damage ping, but you can still spread them out and control multiple rows with these. So these absolutely fantastic cards. I think you definitely need 4 copies of these in any Haven deck that you want to try to play. 2 copies of Devout Priest. This is mainly in here to play beside the Crusader Watchmen, just because it's pretty easy for your opponent's 2/04 shooter that they play on turn 2 to completely neutralize the Watchmen, and you will be losing those fights because you will, at best, shoot them first, and then they'll shoot you back, and then you won't be able to do anything. So you want to be able to put a Devout Priest down beside the Crusader Watchmen and just make sure that he gets back into the game, and he isn't just a useless wall. Wolf Praetorian is the first in a line of large guys, and I've got quite a few large guys coming up. Alongside Wolf Praetorian in the 4 slot, we've got 2 Griffin Marksmen and 2 Crusader Treasurers. I am playing 2 Crusader Treasure instead of 4. The reason for that is because there are quite a few melee creatures in this deck, and I was finding that Crusader Treasure wasn't really coming down on the board as often as I would like, and was just clogging up my hand. So I did end up switching 2 of the treasures for 2 Griffin Marksmen, and I really like the change. The Griffin Marksmen help support your back row. 336 is very large stats for a shooter, especially for 4 mana. Kind of similar to the Wolf Praetorian in that you're almost guaranteed to get good damage off of it, and if it survives the turn, he's going to start dominating the board. NIL is the last 4-drop. She is the first of our unique creatures that we're playing, and the idea is to just keep your 6 health guys healthy. NIL is fantastic with Wolf Praetorian, and she also has the ability to heal up a Crusader Watchman to give it its attack back. The other thing that she's good at is keeping a Griffin Legionnaire stack at high health. If you have, for example, 3 stacks on, and they're down to 9 health, you can heal them back up to 12 and not lose a stack, and just continuously deal 3 damage. It's the other thing to be aware of with the stacks is that if they take enough health that you would lose 1 creature, you actually lose a stack. So if I have 3 stacks on the Griffin Legionnaire, and he takes 4 damage, then he actually loses a stack and just goes down to being 2 attack and 4 retaliation, like he would be with 2 stacks. Past here, we just have 2 Crusader Commanders in the 5-drops. These guys are monsters. One of the things that I found with my early builds of Haven decks was that I was focusing a lot on the lower drops, and I wasn't really having things to close out the game, so I'm really putting a heavier emphasis on things like the Crusader Commander and the Griffin Marksman, just to have bigger things that I can actually close out the game with. NIL Chosen of Light is kind of the 3rd Crusader Commander, except even larger, and she comes out with a Time of Need. Zephyria and Haikyuu are just our last couple support cards. Haikyuu also has a pretty monstrous attack. Both of these cards come down and help you control the board immediately, especially since you're going to be flooding the board with a lot of smaller things. Something that you can do with Haikyuu is if you've got a whole bunch of small stacks, really controlling the board, he comes down and will basically dominate your opponent's board on the turn he comes down. Zephyria as well is going to be able to force something into a bad row that you can take advantage of with your stacks, and also potentially kill a token or just return their largest threat to their hand, as Zephyria tends to do. Taking a look at the spells, we are playing 4 Blinding Lights. I think any deck that has access to light magic should probably be playing 4 Blinding Lights. I'd say this is a close second for the best spell in the game, with the first being easily Geyser. 2 Homebound Winds and 2 Lightning Bolts. These kind of fill the same role. Homebound Winds is a little bit more powerful, just because it does take out like a War Oliphant or anything else that has more than 6 health. In fact, large stacks in a Haven Mirror is actually a really big thing that you can hit with this if your opponent managed to get, for example, 4 stack of Griffin Legionnaires. So Homebound Winds is the perfect answer to that. Lightning Bolts is just the cheaper version of Homebound Winds. It's usually going to be killing whatever it hits. 6 damage is quite a bit, pretty hard to survive. Sunblaze and Firebolt are our early removal. We have 5 copies of them in total. I find that Sunblaze is usually just Firebolt with an upside. The 1 resource over 2 resource isn't too relevant. However, the 2 magic over 1 magic can be, especially in the early game, since you do only start off with 1 magic. Quick note, we don't mind going up to 4 magic for the Lightning Bolts and the Homebound Winds, because Zephyria costs 4 magic herself, and I wouldn't want to not play Zephyria. We only play 1 Fortune, which is a Time of Need. We are playing 4 unique creatures, and so we would really like to be able to search for them with the Time of Need. It doesn't cost very much, so this does give us the option, if we don't want to go up to 4 magic, to only go up to 2 magic and Time of Need out the Zephyria. If we're not going to be using our Homebound Winds and Lightning Bolts, we'd only play 4 copies of them in total. And our buildings is the other reason why you would want to play Haven right now, which is Barracks. Along with the theme of stacking with the Griffin cards, Barracks just gets out of control really quickly. And if we look at how many humans we're playing, we have 32 creatures in our deck, and only 2 of them are not humans. Yes, both Zephyria is a human, and Haikyuu, or Haikyuu, or however you pronounce his name, is also a human, so they will be triggering the Barracks. And, the Moon Phoenix is also not a human. So we're playing 29 humans in the deck in total. That is almost half of the entire deck is humans, so most of our cards are going to be triggering the Barracks, and we're going to be able to get good stacks out of that. Something that I noticed from Barracks, though, is that you can't depend on this being your win condition. Because the stacks degrade whenever they take damage, it's really hard to get them to be 8/8s or even 6/6s. Most of the time, they're going to be hovering around 3/3, 4/4, and your opponent's going to be able to take them out in a single turn. And so they're really good for blocking off rows. They can block a row almost perpetually because you'll be able to play a human pretty much every single turn, but they won't necessarily end the game for you. Taking a quick look at our events, we've got Rise of the Nethermancers and Cosmic Balances. I would really like to have been able to fit a week of knowledge or two into here, just because we aren't usually doing anything on the first turn. Even if we have a Tithe Collector, the first turn is sometimes not the best time to play it. And the Week of Knowledge can really just help you do something useful on your first turn, but I couldn't pass up on 4 Week of the Elder Races. With 29 humans in the deck, this is usually pumping your entire board. Now, before I hop into the games, I do just want to take a quick look at some of the cards that I rejected as I was testing the deck. I've got a nice little list here. First thing is Griffin Battle Priest. I turned this down in favor of Devout Priest, just because the 1 health on our hero per turn isn't really that relevant, and the Devout Priest has 7 health instead of 4, which is very relevant. The ability to survive a lot of spells, along with a ping from a shooter, is really huge. Things like Insect Swarm and Geyser deal 3 damage, which means that the Griffin Battle Priest dies to any junk thing, whereas the Devout Priest is going to be able to survive your average hit from a monster plus one of those 3 damage spells. Crusader Vanguard, I tried to make this card work. However, in the 3-drop slot, you really just want to be playing the Griffin Legionnaires. I think they're basically better in almost every respect than a Crusader Vanguard. However, this is a really solid card, and so if you find room in the deck for it, I would definitely put it in. It's possible that you could cut a couple spells for it, but I'm not really sure what you would want to cut out of the spell suite. Unfortunately, it's just not really strong enough that you can afford to lose a couple of the spells and not have holes in it. Raya, Chosen of the Waves, obviously she's water aligned. We would have been playing Morgan if we wanted to play this, and Morgan was actually the person who I tried to get this to work with initially, just because I did want to play the Geysers. The main points against Raya are that she isn't a human, and she isn't as impactful as either Haikyuu or the other one. Zephyria, that's the word. Yeah, she isn't as impactful as either of those, and we really just want big things to help close out the game. Angel of Mercy, again, not a human, even though she does bring humans back. It's just too bad having more cards that aren't humans. You really need to get as many triggers out of your barracks as possible. Angel Commanders, for the same reason, I would much rather just play an NIL, the big NIL, than an Angel Commander, especially if I'm not going to be playing a human. Damran, if we were playing Charity, we would have had a Damran in the deck. He has very good stats, and he gives you good board control, so he has everything that I was looking for in a unique creature, but again, he isn't human. The other thing that was a point against Charity and Morgan was that they only specialize in 2 schools of magic, whereas Slava specializes in 3, which means that with Slava we get to play the extra unique. We get to play both Haikyuu and Zephyria, whereas with the other ones we would have only gotten to play 2 unique creatures, and the unique creatures are really what pull this deck together. Angel of Salvation, this is a cute card, kind of, in that it makes your humans pretty significantly stronger, but I wasn't really able to make this work, and the stats on it just aren't really acceptable for a 7 resource creature. Some spells that didn't make the cut that I would have really liked to. Geyser, again, if we had been playing Morgan, and I did try to make Morgan work, we would have Geysers in the deck. Insect Swarms if we had been playing Charity. Unfortunately, Insect Swarm does bring down our stack size a lot, which was another strike against Charity, and so if we weren't playing Insect Swarm, then Damran wasn't enough of a reason to be playing Charity, though I'm sure you could make a Charity deck work. Magma Burst and Chain Lightning, both of these cards are kind of just like weaker versions of Geyser, and I almost couldn't bring myself to play either of them just on that alone. However, I did try both of them, and I decided that neither of them were worth it. Magma Burst is pretty close to good, and so is Chain Lightning. Unfortunately, they're both just a little bit too situational. Word of Light is a card that I would seriously consider putting into the deck. However, it's pretty expensive. I think Lightning Bolt and Homebound Winds are both better than Word of Light in general, especially since you're going to be able to take out a lot of small things just because you'll have a lot of things on your board. And so Word of Light probably isn't that necessary. Again, like, you would just have to take out humans for it, and you really don't want to do that. The same reason you wouldn't play the Angels. For Fortunes, Broken Bridge, and Campfire, whenever you notice the deck isn't playing one of these, you really need to take a step back and ask yourself why. The reason here is because they cost 3 Destiny, and you really don't want to go to 3 Destiny. Slava already has extremely low stats, and going up to a 6/4/3 is a really big difference than 6/4/2. You want to start drawing cards as quickly as possible, and these cards aren't impactful enough to warrant the extra Destiny. Cassandra's Imperial Devotion. When I was doing my research and I was looking at a lot of deck lists online, I noticed a lot of Haven decks were actually playing this card, and I couldn't really figure out why. Now, it does give you health, however, in general, I'd rather just have a card that impacts the board than a card that gains me health. So one way to think about it is, say I had an option between playing this and playing a Lightning Bolt, and this would gain me, for example, 6 health, and my opponent has a 4/4/6 on the board. If I play the Lightning Bolt and kill the 4/4/6, then I'm saving all the health that the 4/4/6 would have dealt to me over the course of the next couple turns. So say I go an average of 2 turns not blocking the 4/4/6, I've essentially gained 8 health and killed their guy with the Lightning Bolt, as opposed to just gaining 8 health and not killing their guy with the Cassandra's Imperial Devotion. The other strike against it is that 4 Destiny is even more than what the Campfire and Broken Bridges would have required, and going up to 6/4/4 with this deck is just clearly unacceptable. Garrison, the last card that I really tried to make work but didn't make the cut, simply because too often it was a dead card. Because our stackable creatures search out other copies of themselves, it's pretty easy to have no stackable creatures in your deck by the time that you hit turn 7 or 8, and so any garrisons you draw past that are just completely useless. Garrison does lead to some explosive starts, but if it doesn't lead to an explosive start, having them stuck in your hand not being able to do anything with in the late game is just too bad to warrant having them in the deck. So those are my reasonings for the cards. If you disagree with any of them, feel free to leave a comment. I wouldn't mind iterating even more on this deck, and I might do a couple videos in the future, just revisiting the deck, seeing what changes I've made to it, because I've been having fun with it, and I've been having fun with the deck building process as well. So hopefully I can show you myself winning a couple games and I don't just lose 3 in a row, but we'll see how it goes. So I'll see you guys in the next video.